Welcome to Beyond History's Record, where history remembers the facts and we tell the story. I'm not AI, I'm a real person telling the stories that history is trying desperately to forget. There's a lot of research and work that goes into these stories. We would appreciate your efforts in helping us grow the channel by liking and subscribing and commenting where you're listening from. And if you have a story suggestion, we would love to hear it. Now let's get into tonight's story. Welcome back to our channel, where we review true stories of unsolved mysteries. Tonight's story is the Valley of the Headless Men. The story you're about to hear is based on real historical events, real people, and documented mysteries surrounding Canada's Nahanni Valley, often called the Valley of Headless Men. While the major events, locations, and historical figures are authentic, portions of the dialogue, thoughts, and scene descriptions have been dramatized to create a cinematic retelling where history falls silent, imagination fills only the space between the facts. Chapter 1. Where Maps End. There are places in this world that seem almost untouched by time. Places where roads never reached. Places where the silence feels older than civilization itself. Deep within Canada's Northwest Territories lies one such place, a wilderness so vast that even today many parts of it have never known the sound of an automobile or the glow of a city light. Here mountains rise like broken stone cathedrals. Ancient rivers carve through canyons deeper than skyscrapers are tall. Forests stretch for hundreds of miles without interruption. And somewhere inside those endless miles is a valley that has inspired fear for more than a century. The indigenous people knew of it long before maps were drawn, long before prospectors arrived with dreams of gold, long before newspapers began printing impossible headlines. To outsiders, it would eventually become known by another name, the Valley of Headless Men. It sounds like something invented around a campfire, a tale meant to frighten children. The kind of legend that grows a little larger every time it's told. But legends usually begin with a single story. The Nahanni mystery begins with bodies. Some were discovered, others simply vanished, and a few were never explained. The first light of dawn spilled over the Mackenzie Mountains, turning their snow-covered peaks into walls of burning gold. A cold wind drifted through the spruce trees, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and glacial water. The valley looked peaceful, beautiful even. Nothing about it suggested danger. If anything, it invited curiosity. That perhaps was its greatest deception. Nature has a remarkable ability to hide its violence beneath extraordinary beauty. The same river that sparkles beneath the morning sun can become a raging torrent before nightfall. A narrow trail can disappear beneath fresh fall snow. A peaceful forest can swallow a man without leaving behind so much as a footprint. The Nahanni wilderness possessed all of those dangers. But people would eventually wonder if it possessed something more. The stories reached civilization slowly. One trapper would mention hearing strange sounds echoing through the mountains. Another claimed to have found abandoned camps with meals still cooking over dead fires. Hunters spoke quietly of seeing enormous tracks where no animal should have been able to walk. Most dismissed such stories. Isolation plays tricks on the human mind. Loneliness can turn ordinary sound into whispers. Fog can transform fallen trees into towering figures. Fear has always been an excellent storyteller. Still, The stories refused to die. Instead, they multiplied. By the late 19th century, rumors of gold had begun spreading among northern Canada. Gold has always possessed a strange power over humanity. It convinces ordinary men to abandon comfortable lives. It persuades fathers to leave their families behind. It whispers promises that reason cannot silence. Entire towns have risen because of it. Entire civilizations have collapsed chasing it. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the Nahanni River becomes one more place where men believe fortunes were waiting. Maps of the region were little more than educated guesses. Many valleys had never been explored. Entire mountain ranges remained unnamed. If unimaginable wealth truly exists there, someone would have to be first. That simple belief drew prospectors deeper into the wilderness. Some returned. Many did not. The indigenous people watched all of this with quiet concern. For generations they had lived alongside these mountains. They understood the rivers. They respected the changing weather. Most importantly, they knew there were places better left alone. Their warnings were often misunderstood. European settlers assumed they feared spirits. Perhaps they did. Or perhaps they simply understood the unforgiving reality of the wilderness far better than those chasing dreams of easy riches. History has a habit of confusing wisdom with superstition. Only later, after tragedy followed tragedy, would outsiders begin to ask whether those warnings had been worth hearing at all. Years passed. The stories grew stranger. Every expedition seemed to leave behind another unanswered question. A missing canoe, a deserted cabin, a campsite abandoned so suddenly that rifles, food, and supplies remained exactly where their owners had left them. Then came reports that newspapers could not ignore. Men were disappearing. Not just one, not just two, not just one time, but again and again. Each new mystery seemed impossible on its own. Together, they began forming something far more unsettling. A pattern. The valley was becoming known for something far more valuable than gold. It had become known for those who entered and never returned. There is an old saying among explorers: the wilderness doesn't hate you. It simply doesn't care whether you live or die. Perhaps that explains everything. Perhaps every disappearance can be blamed upon rivers, bears, freezing temperature, accidents, starvation, and impossible terrain. Those explanations are reasonable. Many historians believe they are correct, but there is one detail, one fact, that has refused to fit comfortably into an ordinary explanation. It would transform a remote Canadian valley into one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. And it begins with two brothers, two men chasing gold. Two men who, believing they had finally found their fortune every prospector dreamed of, they would leave for the Nahanni Valley together. Yet it would only be their story that would return. Chapter 2. The McLeod Brothers. The North has a way of changing a man, not because it is cruel, but because it is indifferent. It does not reward courage. It does not admire determination. It makes no distinction between the experienced explorer and the eager beginner. The wilderness simply exists, and those who venture into it must accept its terms. At the turn of the 20th century, thousands of men did exactly that. The Klondike Gold Rush had ignited imaginations across America. Newspapers printed stories of ordinary laborers becoming wealthy almost overnight. Every new rumor of gold sent another wave of prospectors into a land few outsiders had ever seen. Most returned with little more than stories. Some never returned at all. Among those drawn north were two brothers from the Edmonton area, Frank McLeod and Willie McLeod. The historical record tells us only so much about them. They were experienced outdoorsmen. They knew hardship. Like countless other prospectors of their era, they believed that somewhere beyond the mapped world lay a discovery worth risking everything to find. That belief would carry them into the Nahanni wilderness. Today, no one can say exactly what the brothers talked about as they prepared for their journey. History rarely preserves conversations. It preserves outcomes, but anyone who has ever set out on a difficult expedition can imagine the mixture of confidence and uncertainty that accompanies the first steps. There would have been supplies to gather: flour, salted meat, coffee, axes sharpened against the stones, a rifle carefully cleaned, gold pans packed beside blankets already smelling faintly of campfire smoke from previous trips. Each item represented one more chance of surviving another week in the wilderness. Each unnecessary pound meant more weight to carry over mountains and through rivers. Nothing was packed without reason, and by the time they departed, the brothers had become just two more figures disappearing into an immense landscape. Ahead of them stretched a forest that seems endless. The South Nahanni River twisted through steep valleys, its powerful current cutting through rocks that had stood for thousands of years. Towering cliffs overlooked narrow canyons. Waterfalls thundered into clouds of mist. To many, it was one of the most beautiful places on earth. But to others, it was becoming something else. Long before the McLeod brothers arrived, indigenous communities had spoke of the region with respect. Some areas were visited, others were avoided. Most historians offered practical reasons for these traditions. The terrain was unforgiving. Weather could change without warning. Rivers could become deadly within hours. A single injury, many days from help, could quickly become fatal. Whether those warnings reflected practical knowledge, spiritual beliefs, or a combination of both is still discussed today. Whatever the reason, the valley demanded respect. The McLeod brothers pressed onward. Weeks passed, perhaps months. No journal survives to tell us precisely where they camped each night or which mountain pass they crossed. There are no photographs documenting their route. Only scattered historical references remain. And then, they disappeared. At first, no one panicked. Prospectors often stayed in the wilderness longer than expected. Storms delayed travel. Rivers flooded. Game was scarce. Delays were simply part of life in the north. But as the seasons changed, concern grew. Eventually, searchers entered the valley. They were not looking for mystery. They were looking for two missing men. What they found would become one of the most enduring stories associated with Nahanni. According to widely repeated historical accounts, the brothers' skeletal remains were discovered near what appeared to be their campsite. One detail transformed the discovery into legend. Their skulls were missing. This single fact spread rapidly through the newspapers and campfire conversations alike. Soon, the Nahanni acquired a chilling nickname, the Valley of the Headless Men. Over the years, historians have debated the details surrounding the discovery. Some accounts differ from others. Some descriptions grew more dramatic with repeated retelling. That often happens when history and folklore begin to intertwine. Separating documented fact from embellished legend is one of the greatest challenges in studying the Nahanni mystery. Yet one truth remains beyond dispute. The deaths of the McLeod brothers changed the reputation of the valley forever. From that point forward, every disappearance, every abandoned camp, every unexplained death would be viewed through the shadow of their story. It was no longer just another remote wilderness. It had become a place people whispered about. A place where maps seemed incomplete, where rumors traveled faster than facts, and where every explorer carried one unsettling question into the mountains. What really happened to the McLeod brothers? No one could answer. But the valley was not finished writing the story. Within a few years, another prospector would vanish. His cabin would be later found burned to the ground. And once again, the Nahanni would refuse to give up its secrets. Chapter 3. The Cabin That Burned. The wilderness remembers everything. It remembers every boot print pressed into wet earth, every paddle that disturbed the surface of the river, every tree scarred by an axe, every campfire that briefly pushed back the darkness. Yet when the last ember dies, the forest begins erasing every trace that man was ever there. It is patient. Given enough time, even the greatest expedition becomes nothing more than a rumor. By the early 20th century, the Nahanni had already begun earning a reputation unlike any other place in Canada. Prospectors still came. Adventure had a way of drowning out caution. After all, the McLeod brothers had become a story. Stories happened to other people. Every man who packed his canoe believed he would be the one who returned with the gold. Among those drawn north was another prospector. His name was Martin Jorgensen. Unlike many tales surrounding the valley, Jorgensen was a real man whose disappearance became part of the Nahanni's growing legend. The historical record tells us he had gone into the region searching for gold. Like countless prospectors before him, he believed the hardships would be worth the reward. For a time, there was little reason to think otherwise. The North demanded long periods of silence. Months could pass without anyone seeing another human being. Cabins became lifelines. A few rough, hewn logs, a stone fireplace, a bunk, a table. Simple shelters built against impossible odds. They were more than homes. They were promises. A promise that winter could be survived. A promise that another spring would come. Somewhere along the Nahanni, Martin Jorgensen built such a cabin. No one knows exactly what his days looked like. Perhaps they began before sunrise. Coffee boiled over a small fire. Boots stiff with frost. A pan worked patiently through gravel and the freezing current. Hours of labor for only a few tiny flakes of gold. That was the rhythm of prospecting. Long stretches of disappointment, interrupted by moments of hope. History grows quiet here. No diary survives describing Jorgensen's final days. No letter tells us what he was thinking. No witnesses record what happened next. Then, the silence was broken. When others eventually reached his camp, they did not find a prospector celebrating a rich strike. They found destruction. Jorgensen's camp had burned. According to historical accounts, his remains were discovered among the ashes. Newspaper quickly seized upon the story. To many readers living hundreds or even thousands of miles away, another unexplained death in the Nahanni seemed to confirm what they already feared. Something terrible lurked in the valley, but history asks us to be more careful than fear does. Was the fire accidental? Could a lantern have tipped over? Did a chimney spark ignite dry timber? Was another person involved? More than a century later, those questions remain unanswered. The evidence disappears within the flames. And where evidence ends, speculation begins. Some insist Jorgensen had discovered a rich deposit of gold and had been murdered for it. Others believe the wilderness itself had claimed another victim. Still others whisper of darker possibilities. Each retelling adds another layer to the legend. By then, newspapers had discovered something else. Mysteries sold copies. A headline about a tragic accident rarely captured attention, but a headline about a haunted valley, that certainly did. Stories traveled by rail, by riverboat, by word of mouth around campfires. Each storyteller remembered the different details. Each listener imagined something slightly more frightening than the last. That is how legends grow. Not all at once, but one conversation, one newspaper, one unanswered question at a time. Meanwhile, the valley remained exactly as it had always been. The river continued carving its way through ancient stone. Mountain sheep climb impossible cliffs. Ravens circle high above the canyons. The wind carried no explanation. Nature rarely offers one. There is something unsettling about a place where answers never come. The human mind dislikes unfinished stories. We instinctively search for causes, for motives, for certainty, where certainty cannot be found. Imagination eagerly fills the voids. The Nahanni became fertile ground for imagination. Soon people spoke of strange lights seen above distant ridges. Others claimed they heard voices carried through the trees. Some describe enormous footprints where no companion could be found. Whether any of those accounts were true, misidentified, or simply exaggerated over time, it is impossible to know. But each story was strengthened by the valley's reputation. It no longer mattered whether every tale could be proven. The Nahanni had become something larger than geography. It had become a symbol, a place where the known world seemed to end, a place the unknown began. For decades, adventurers would continue entering its mountains. Some returned with remarkable stories. Others returned with nothing but questions. And yet still a few never returned at all. As the years passed, investigators, journalists, explorers, and treasure hunters would all attempt to solve the mysteries. Each believed they might finally uncover the truth. Instead, they found another puzzle waiting, because the greatest mystery of the Nahanni was never one death or two. It was why so many strange stories seemed drawn to the same remote valley. Was it coincidence? The unforgiving wilderness? Human greed? Or had the legend itself become so powerful that every unexplained event was forever tied to one haunted place? The answer was still somewhere beyond the next bend in the river. Chapter 4. Where Legends Take Root. Every legend has a beginning, but very few begin with monsters. Most begin with something much simpler. A question, one that cannot be answered. The Nahanni Valley had become a place filled with such questions. Why had experienced outdoorsmen disappeared? Why did tragedy seem to revisit the same remote wilderness? Why did every expedition seem to return with one more mystery instead of one more answer? By the second decade of the 20th century, the valley had become something larger than a location on a map. It had become an idea, a place where certainty seemed to disappear as quickly as the people who entered it. Yet there was another side to the Nahanni, often overlooked by those captivated by the headlines. To understand the mystery, you must first understand the land itself. Stretching through the Mackenzie Mountains, the South Nahanni River cuts across an ancient landscape, unlike almost anywhere else in North America. Towering limestone cliffs rise hundreds of feet above emerald water. Hidden caves disappear into darkness. Narrow canyons funnel wind that can change from calm to violent in minutes. In the spring, snow melt transforms quiet streams into raging torrents. In winter, temperature plunges far below freezing. Even in summer, a single storm can strand travelers for days. Modern adventurers visit the region with satellite phones, GPS receivers, weather forecasts, and emergency rescue services. The prospectors who entered these mountains more than a century ago had none of those things. A broken canoe, a twisted ankle, a misplaced trail. Any one of those could become a death sentence. Many historians believe the harshness of the wilderness explains much of the valley's tragic reputation. It is an explanation rooted in geography rather than mystery, and it deserves serious consideration. But geography alone cannot explain why stories continues to grow long after the newspaper stops printing sensational headlines. The indigenous people had lived in the region for generations before prospectors ever arrived. Their knowledge of the land came not from maps, but from experience. They understood which rivers could be trusted, which mountain passes remained opened, which seasons invited travel, and which demanded patience. Historical accounts describe traditions and stories connected to different parts of the Nahanni, though many details have been passed down through oral history rather than written record. As with many indigenous traditions, those stories evolved over generations. Some spoke of places deserving special respect. Others warned against unnecessary risks in isolated valleys and canyons. Exactly what those stories meant and how they should be interpreted today remains a matter of careful discussion. What is certain is this: long before outsiders arrived searching for gold, the people who knew the land best understood its power. Perhaps the greatest mistake made by many prospectors was assuming the wilderness could be conquered. The Nahanni was never conquered. It merely allowed people to pass through it when conditions permitted. As reports of disappearances spread, another phenomenon quietly took hold: expectation. A traveler entering into an ordinary forest expects an ordinary experience. A traveler entering in the Valley of Headless Men expects something unusual. Psychologists call this expectation bias. When we anticipate danger, we notice every unfamiliar sound, every moment in the shadows, every unexplained event. The ordinary begins to feel extraordinary. A raven's call becomes a warning. A distant echo becomes a human voice. A bear's footprint seems impossibly large after retelling the story around a campfire. That does not mean every report was false. Only that fear changes the way we experience the unknown. Yet still, some stories refuse to fit neatly into that explanation. Hunters describe abandoned camps where supplies remain untouched. Pilots report seeing smoke from valleys where no one should have been living. Explorers occasionally stumble upon old cabins reclaimed by moss and forest. Reminders that someone had once believed they could build a life in these mountains. Each discovery added another layer to the valley's growing mythology. Then there was the silence. Anyone who had spent time far from civilization knows that true wilderness has its own sound. The wind, rushing water, birds singing, branches creaking overhead. But there are moments, brief moments, when all of it suddenly stops. No birds, no insects, no wind, only silence. Many experienced outdoorsmen have described that sensation in forests around the world. Some attribute it to the presence of predators. Others believe it is simply nature's rhythm. Whatever the cause, those moments leave a lasting impression. In a place already surrounded by mystery, silence itself becomes part of the legend. As years passed, writers and journalists began collecting the valley's stories. Some approached the subject with skepticism. Others leaned into the supernatural. Books were written. Magazine articles appeared. Radio programs repeated the tale to audiences who had never set foot in Canada's far north. With every retelling, the Nahanni drifted a little farther from documented history and a little closer to folklore. Perhaps that is inevitable. History seeks evidence. Legend seeks meaning. The Nahanni has become home to both. Somewhere beneath the mysteries are real people, real families, and real tragedies. That is worth remembering. Because behind every headline was someone who had once packed supplies, said goodbye to loved ones, and believed that they would soon return home. Many never did. The valley kept their stories, and in doing so, it became one of the last great mysteries of the North. But the most unsettling chapter has not yet been written. In the years that followed, there were new disappearances, strange discoveries, and stories difficult to explain would continue adding to the Nahanni's reputation. Whether coincidence, misfortune, or something else entirely, the legend still grows. Chapter 5. Searching for Answers. There comes a point in every mystery when the question becomes more famous than the answer. For the Nahanni Valley, that moment had arrived. Decades had passed since the McLeod brothers disappeared into the wilderness. Martin Jorgensen's burned cabin has become another chapter in the valley's growing legend. Newspaper headlines had carried the stories across Canada and beyond. The valley's reputation had taken on a life of its own. By then, there were two Nahannis. One was real, a vast wilderness of rivers, mountains, waterfalls, and unforgiving territories. The other existed in the public's imagination, a place where people vanished, where strange stories echo through a forest, and where every unexplained event seems to confirm that something extraordinary was happening. The challenge was determining where one ended and the other began. As interest in the valley grew, so did the number of people determined to solve its mysteries. Journalists traveled north searching for dramatic stories. Treasure hunters hoped the legends of lost gold still held some truth. Explorers entered the region carrying cameras instead of pickaxes. Each expected to uncover the secret that had eluded everyone before them. Most returned with admiration for the landscape. Some returned with questions. None returned with definitive answers. Modern historians have approached the Nahanni from a different perspective. Rather than beginning with folklore, they begin with geography. The valley is isolated. The weather is unpredictable. Its rivers can transform from manageable to deadly within a matter of hours. Steep cliffs, freezing water, wildlife, injury, and simple exhaustion have claimed lives in wilderness areas around the world. From that viewpoint, the Nahanni is not cursed. It is simply one of the most unforgiving places in North America. It is a compelling explanation, perhaps even the most likely one. Yet for many people, it has never felt entirely complete. After all, history is filled with dangerous wilderness. Few places have earned a name as haunting as the Valley of Headless Men. The truth may lie somewhere between tragedy and legend. While newspapers first reported the discoveries, details often travel slowly. One article repeated another. Facts became shortened. Legends became lengthened. Descriptions became more dramatic. Over the years, authors sometimes relied on earlier accounts that were themselves based on newspaper reports. With each retelling, separating verified information from embellished traditions becomes increasingly difficult. This is one reason historians continue to debate certain details surrounding the Nahanni stories today. The passage of time has a way of blurring every sincere eyewitness account. But one thing remains remarkably clear. Real people entered that wilderness, and some of them never returned. That much is beyond dispute. As researchers studied the valley, another realization emerged. The Nahanni was not unique because every story could be proven. It was unique because so many unrelated stories had gathered in one place. Disappearances, unexpected deaths, abandoned camps, lost prospectors, burned cabins, whispers of hidden gold. Each event added another thread to a tapestry that no single person had woven. And perhaps that is why the mystery has endured, not because of one incident, but because of many. Some visitors claim to feel an overwhelming sense of isolation, unlike anywhere they had ever traveled. Others describe the opposite, a strange feeling that they were not entirely alone. Such experiences are impossible to measure. The wilderness has a way of magnifying every emotion. A lost raven crossing an empty sky, mist rolling silently across a river, a distant echo between canyon walls, in a city Those moments pass unnoticed, but in the Nahanni, they become unforgettable. Then there were the stories that defied easy explanation. Campfires reportedly found still smoldering, though no one could be located nearby. Old trails that seemed to disappear into solid rock. Cabins standing empty for years, slowly surrendering to moss and weather. Many of these accounts cannot be independently verified. Some almost certainly grew larger in the telling. Even so, they reveal something important, that the Nahanni has become more than a place. It's become a canvas upon which people painted their fears, their hopes, and their imaginations. Every generation added another brushstroke. Today, satellite imagery can map nearly every bend in the South Nahanni River. Aircraft regularly fly over countryside that was once considered inaccessible. Modern adventurers carry GPS receivers, satellite communicators, emergency beacons, and detailed topographical maps. Technology has transformed how we experience the wilderness, yet it has not erased the mystery. Thousands visit the Nahanni every year, drawn not only by its breathtaking beauty, but also by the stories that refuse to fade. Some arrive hoping to witness history. Others hope to experience the legend. Most leave with a profound respect for both. Perhaps that is the valley's greatest secret. It does not demand belief. It simply invites questions. And the more questions one asks, the deeper the mystery seems to become. There is an old saying among wilderness guides: the land was here long before us, and it will remain long after we are gone. Few places make that truth feel more tangible than the Nahanni. The mountains remain, the river continues its endless journey, the forest reclaims what man abandoned. The valley waits. It is unchanged. It is patient. It is silent, still holding answers that may never be discovered. And perhaps that is exactly why people continue to return, not to prove the legend, but to stand in a place where history and mystery still walk side by side. Chapter 6. The valley keeps its secrets. There is something deeply human about wanting every mystery to have an answer. We search for patterns. We look for motives. We gather evidence. And when the evidence refuses to tell a complete story, we continue to ask questions. For more than 100 years, people have done exactly that with the Nahanni Valley. Some enter searching for gold. Others search for truth. Still others search for something they could not quite explain. Most found something altogether different. Respect. By now the valley's reputation has spread far beyond Canada's northern wilderness. Writers describe it as haunted. Newspapers call it cursed. Adventure magazines portray it as one of the last unexplored frontiers on Earth. Each generation inherited the stories and had a few of its own. Yet the valley itself remains unchanged. The mountains did not know they had become famous. The river did not care about headlines. Every spring, the snowmelt rushed through the canyons. Every autumn, the forest turned shades of gold before surrendering to another long winter. Nature continues its endless rhythm, unconcerned with the legends people attach to it. Today, we know far more about the Nahanni than those first prospectors ever could. Satellite imagery reveals the valley they struggled to map. Aircraft reach places that once required weeks of dangerous travel. Emergency beacons, satellite communicators, and modern equipment have made exploration far safer than it was a century ago. Yet one thing technology cannot provide, it is certainty about the past. No satellite can replay history. No photography exists in the McLeod brothers' final hours. No witnesses can explain exactly what happened inside Morton Jorgensen's cabin before the fire. Time has hidden those moments forever. Modern historians generally agree that many of the tragedies associated with the Nahanni can be explained by the extraordinary dangers of the wilderness itself. The isolation, the extreme weather, the treacherous rivers, the wildfire, the injury, the human conflict, the greed. Each has claimed lives in remote regions throughout history. Those explanations deserve careful consideration. They are supported by what we know about survival in one of the harshest landscapes in North America. But even after accepting those realities, the valley retains its power, not because it proves the supernatural, but because it reminds us how much history can lose. Think about it. How many journals were never recovered? How many conversations vanished with the people who spoke them? How many discoveries were carried to the grave by those who never returned home? The wilderness does not preserve memories. It erases them. Slowly, patiently, until only fragments remain. Perhaps that is why the Nahanni continues to capture our imagination. It's not simply a mystery. It is a reminder of how fragile the historical record can be. One missing page, one unmarked grave, one forgotten trail. An ordinary story can become an unsolved legend. But there is another lesson hidden within these mountains. The men who entered the Nahanni were not foolish. They were courageous. They were curious. They were hopeful. Many believed that they were standing on the edge of a discovery that would change their lives forever. In many ways, they were right. Not just in the way they expected. They found no legendary fortune. Instead, they became part of one of Canada's greatest wilderness mysteries. More than a century later, visitors still travel into Nahanni National Park. They come to paddle the South Nahanni River. They stand beside Virginia Falls to watch clouds drift through the McKenzie Mountains. Most experience nothing more mysterious than its breathtaking beauty. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be. Because beyond every legend, there is a real place. A place deserving of respect. A place that has long been home to indigenous people whose knowledge of the land stretches back countless generations. A place where nature still reigns. Perhaps the greatest danger was never something hidden within the valley at all. Perhaps it was the belief that man could master a wilderness that demanded humility. The Nahanni never belonged to the explorer. It never belonged to the prospector. It never belonged to the storyteller. It belongs to itself. And maybe that is the answer we've been searching for all along. Not an answer to every disappearance. Not an explanation for every rumor. But an understanding that some places refuse to surrender all of their secrets. History often asks us to accept uncertainty. The Nahanni demands it. So, was the Valley of the Headless Men truly cursed? Did hidden riches lead men to betray one another? Did harsh wilderness claim lives that later generations transformed into legend? Or did several unrelated tragedies simply converge in one remote corner of Canada until history and folklore became impossible to separate? The honest answer is that we still do not know, and perhaps we never will. But what we do know is this: the McLeod brothers were real. Martin Jorgensen was real. The wilderness is real. The tragedies were real. And yet the questions remain real. As the sun sets beyond the Mackenzie Mountains, shadows once again stretch across the South Nahanni River. The wind moves quietly through the spruce trees. Waters rush endlessly through the canyons. The valley waits, just as it has for thousands of years, silently, patiently, unchanged, keeping its secrets. One more night. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy true historical mysteries told through cinematic storytelling, consider subscribing for more journeys beyond the pages of history, because history records the facts, but some stories live beyond history's record.